The story of Rome begins not with grandeur, but with scattered settlements perched atop 7 modest hills overlooking the Tiber River. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of human habitation dating back to the 10th century BC. Pottery fragments, bronze tools, and remnants of simple huts providing tangible proof of communities that would coalesce into history's most powerful empire. But how did a collection of hilltop villages transform into the civilization that would shape the Western world for millennia? The legendary account, immortalized by later historians, tells of twin brothers Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants and suckled by a she-wolf before being raised by a shepherd. According to this narrative, the brothers decided to establish a city but quarreled over its location, leading Romulus to kill Remus and found Rome on the Palatine Hill in 753 BC. While modern historians treat this tale as mythological, the date has become conventionally accepted as Rome's founding year, and archaeological evidence does support the existence of settlements during this period. These early dwellings were simple affairs, circular or oval huts with thatched roofs supported by wooden posts, their walls constructed from wattle and daub. The discovery of cooking hearths, storage pits, and refuse deposits paints a picture of small agricultural communities engaged in farming, animal husbandry, and basic crafts. The transition from scattered villages to a unified urban center occurred gradually over the 8th and 7th centuries BC. The Forum Boarium, located between the Palatine and Aventine hills near the Tiber, became an important cattle market and trading post. As separate communities grew and interacted more frequently, they began merging into a single political and social entity. This wasn't random chance. It was strategic positioning at a natural ford that made this location invaluable for controlling river traffic and trade routes connecting the Italian peninsula's interior with coastal regions. The stage was set for something extraordinary. The Etruscan civilization, which flourished in central Italy from approximately the 8th to 3rd centuries BC, exerted profound influence on early Roman development. These sophisticated people had established city-states throughout Tuscany and Latium featuring advanced metallurgy, elaborate burial practices, and complex urban planning. Their cities boasted paved streets, sewer systems, and impressive fortifications constructed from massive stone blocks. Etruscan artisans excelled in bronze working, producing intricate mirrors, vessels, and decorative objects, demonstrating remarkable technical skill. Etruscan religious practices left an indelible mark on Roman culture. The tradition of haruspicy, divining the future through examination of animal entrails, particularly sheep livers, became deeply embedded in Roman religious observance. The practice of augury, interpreting divine will through observation of bird flight patterns, similarly became central to Roman religious and political decision-making. Roman magistrates would not undertake major actions without first taking the auspices, a practice derived directly from Etruscan tradition. Architectural techniques pioneered by the Etruscans revolutionized Roman construction methods. The Etruscans developed the true arch, a structural innovation allowing for larger spans and more durable buildings than simple post and lintel construction. They also perfected techniques for creating vaulted roofs and underground drainage systems. The famous Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system, was constructed using Etruscan engineering principles and may have been built by Etruscan workers under the Tarquin kings. Urban planning concepts borrowed from Etruscan cities shaped Rome's physical development, with streets oriented according to cardinal directions and sacred boundaries called pomerium marking city limits. The governmental structures that emerged during Rome's monarchical period bore clear Etruscan influence. The fasces, bundles of rods bound around an axe that symbolized magisterial authority, originated in Etruscan tradition and became one of Rome's most recognizable symbols of power. Rome wasn't built in isolation. It was forged in the crucible of cultural exchange, absorbing the best innovations of its neighbors while developing its own unique character. Subscribe to Flow of History to continue this journey through the rise of civilizations. During the monarchical period, traditionally dated from 753 to 509 BC, Rome was governed by 7 kings, who established many institutions that would survive throughout the Republican era. The Senate, initially an advisory body composed of elder statesmen chosen by the king, emerged as a powerful force in Roman governance. These senators, called patres or fathers, came from Rome's most prominent families and provided continuity across different reigns. The patrician class system crystallized during this period, creating a hereditary aristocracy that claimed descent from Rome's original founding families. Patricians monopolized religious offices, held exclusive rights to interpret religious law, and controlled access to political power. Below the patricians stood the plebeians, a diverse group including farmers, merchants, artisans, and laborers who comprised the majority of Rome's population, but initially lacked political rights. This social division would spark conflicts that would reshape Roman society for centuries. The monarchy's final phase witnessed increasing tension between royal authority and aristocratic privilege. Tarquin the Proud, the 7th and last king, ruled from approximately 535 to 509 BC and pursued policies that alienated both patricians and plebeians. Unlike his predecessors, who had generally respected aristocratic prerogatives, Tarquin governed autocratically and showed little regard for traditional constraints on royal power. The immediate catalyst for Tarquin's overthrow involved his son, Sextus, Tarquinius's assault on Lucretia, wife of a prominent nobleman. According to traditional accounts, Lucretia took her own life after revealing the attack, demanding her family avenge her honor. This incident galvanized opposition to the royal family and provided a rallying point for political change. Lucius Junius Brutus emerged as leader of the anti-monarchist movement, organizing the conspiracy that expelled Tarquin in 509 BC. The revolution represented more than simply replacing one ruler with another. The conspirators sought to prevent any individual from accumulating absolute power. 2 consuls, elected annually by popular assembly, replaced the single king as Rome's chief magistrates. This marked the birth of the Roman Republic, a system of shared authority and limited terms that would govern Rome for nearly 5 centuries. Everything Rome would become, its laws, its conquests, its legacy, flowed from this revolutionary moment when Romans rejected kingship and embraced representative government. The establishment of the Roman Republic in 509 BC created immediate internal tensions that would define the next 2.5 centuries. The patrician families who had orchestrated Tarquin's expulsion quickly moved to consolidate control over the new government, effectively excluding the plebeian majority from meaningful political participation. This sparked what historians term the conflict of the orders, a prolonged struggle between Rome's aristocratic elite and its common citizens that fundamentally transformed Roman society. The plebeians, despite comprising roughly 95% of Rome's population, found themselves barred from holding major magistracies, serving as priests, or even knowing the specific laws by which they were governed. Economic grievances compounded these political exclusions. Many plebeian farmers had fallen into debt, and Roman debt law was particularly harsh. Creditors could seize debtors' property, enslave them, or even kill them if debts remained unpaid. The first major confrontation occurred around 494 BC, when plebeians organized what amounted to the world's first recorded general strike. Facing military service in a war, plebeian soldiers instead withdrew from the city and established a separate settlement on the Sacred Mount. This action demonstrated remarkable organizational capacity and political sophistication. The crisis forced patricians to negotiate, resulting in creation of the tribunes of the plebs, a revolutionary institution giving plebeians their first formal political representation. Tribunes possessed sacrosanctitas, making their persons inviolable under religious law. More importantly, tribunes wielded the power of intercessio, allowing them to veto any action by a magistrate deemed harmful to plebeian interests. This veto power extended to Senate decrees. judicial proceedings, and even military conscription orders. But this marked only the beginning of centuries-long political evolution. Each crisis resulted in new concessions that gradually democratized Roman government. The 12 tables, created around 450 BC, represented the first written codification of Roman law, ending patrician monopoly over legal knowledge by making laws publicly accessible. These principles, representation, written law, checks on power, would echo through Western political thought for millennia. The conflict of the orders intersected with Rome's expanding military commitments throughout the Italian peninsula. The early republic faced constant warfare with neighboring peoples, conflicts that tested both Roman military capabilities and political cohesion. The Aequi, a mountain people living east of Rome, launched regular raids into Roman territory. The Volsci presented a different challenge, controlling fertile territory south of Rome that Romans coveted for agricultural expansion. Unlike the Aequi, who primarily raided, the Volsci maintained organized city-states with professional armies capable of meeting Roman forces in conventional battles. These conflicts established patterns that would characterize Roman expansion throughout Italy. Rome rarely sought to annihilate defeated enemies, but instead incorporated them into expanding alliance networks through treaties defining mutual obligations. Some defeated peoples received full Roman citizenship. Others gained Latin rights providing legal protections and commercial privileges, while still others became allies bound to provide military service in exchange for protection. This flexible approach to conquest allowed Rome to grow rapidly while maintaining internal stability. The catastrophic sack of Rome by Gallic forces in 387 BC fundamentally altered Roman strategic thinking and military organization. The Gauls, Celtic peoples from beyond the Alps, had been migrating into northern Italy. Led by a chieftain named Brennus, a large Gallic army moved south, defeating Roman forces at the Battle of the Allia before capturing and burning most of Rome itself. The Gallic warriors who descended on Rome presented a terrifying spectacle, standing significantly taller than most Romans, with long hair bleached with lime and bodies decorated with intricate tattoos, fighting with wild enthusiasm that intimidated even experienced soldiers. The psychological impact of seeing these fierce warriors proved as devastating as the physical destruction they caused. Gallic forces burned temples, destroyed public buildings, and looted private homes while most of Rome's population fled to the countryside. Everything Romans had built seemed to crumble in days. But from this catastrophe would come transformation. Rome would rebuild stronger, more determined, and more militarily sophisticated than before. The reconstruction following the Gallic sack incorporated hard-learned lessons about defensive strategy and urban planning. The Romans built the Servian Wall, a massive fortification system enclosing all 7 hills and stretching for approximately 11 kilometers. Constructed from large blocks of tufa stone, the wall stood 6 meters high and 4 meters thick. Incorporating sophisticated defensive features, military reforms implemented after the sack addressed tactical weaknesses. Roman commanders recognized that their traditional phalanx formation lacked the flexibility needed to respond effectively to unconventional enemies. They began experimenting with more adaptable formations that would eventually evolve into the manipular system dominating Roman tactics for centuries. The trauma of 387 BC also influenced Roman diplomatic strategy, making leaders more willing to seek allies and less likely to rely solely on their own military strength. Rome began cultivating relationships with other Italian peoples threatened by Gallic expansion, creating mutual defense agreements that provided security while expanding Roman influence. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome had emerged stronger and more militarily sophisticated than before. This transformation became evident during the Pyrrhic Wars, Rome's first major confrontation with Hellenistic military technology and tactics. King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a skilled general and distant relative of Alexander the Great, brought professional armies equipped with the latest Greek innovations to support Tarentum in its conflict with Rome. His forces included Macedonian-style phalanxes armed with 18-foot pikes, light infantry skirmishers, and, most spectacular, war elephants. The elephants, imported from India and trained for warfare, stood nearly 3 meters tall. Armored with bronze plates and carrying towers containing archers, they served as ancient tanks capable of breaking enemy formations through sheer physical impact. The psychological effect of these enormous animals trumpeting and charging across the battlefield proved as important as their tactical capabilities. The Battle of Heraclea in 280 BC demonstrated both the effectiveness of Hellenistic military technology and the resilience of Roman tactical adaptation. Roman forces initially struggled against Pyrrhus's combined arms approach, but commanders quickly began developing countermeasures. They discovered that elephants could be wounded by concentrated missile fire and would then rampage uncontrollably, often trampling their own troops. While Pyrrhus technically won both major battles, his casualties were so severe that he allegedly remarked another such victory would destroy his army entirely, giving rise to the term Pyrrhic victory. Rome had learned a crucial lesson. Adaptability and determination could overcome any tactical advantage. This would become Rome's greatest strength. By 264 BC, Rome's control over the Italian peninsula had created an inevitable collision course with Carthage, the dominant maritime power of the Western Mediterranean. The Carthaginians had established their empire through centuries of commercial expansion, founding trading posts and colonies from modern-day Tunisia to southern Spain. Their capital commanded one of the Mediterranean's finest natural harbors and served as hub of a vast commercial network, generating enormous wealth through trade in precious metals, textiles, ivory, and exotic goods from sub-Saharan Africa. The immediate cause of the First Punic War arose from a dispute over Messana, a strategic city controlling the narrow strait between Sicily and the Italian mainland. Roman entry into Sicilian affairs marked a fundamental shift in strategic thinking. Previous Roman conflicts had focused on territorial expansion within Italy, but Sicily represented Rome's first overseas commitment requiring sustained naval operations. The Roman Senate initially hesitated, but the potential threat of Carthaginian control ultimately convinced leaders that intervention was necessary. Recognizing they could not compete with Carthaginian seamanship through conventional means, Roman engineers developed the corvus, a rotating bridge equipped with a heavy spike that could be dropped onto enemy ship decks. This device transformed naval combat from ramming contests into infantry battles fought on ship decks. The construction of Rome's first major naval fleet required unprecedented mobilization of resources. Roman shipbuilders allegedly used a captured Carthaginian quinquereme as a template for mass production. The Battle of Mylae in 260 BC marked Rome's first significant naval victory, demonstrating the effectiveness of their tactical innovations. The war dragged on for 23 years, testing Roman determination through repeated disasters. Storms destroyed much of the fleet returning from Africa, drowning thousands. But Roman persistence despite these setbacks demonstrated the Republic's fundamental strength, the ability to absorb enormous losses while maintaining popular support for continued warfare. The decisive Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BC finally ended the First Punic War when a Roman fleet defeated the last major Carthaginian naval force. The peace treaty established Rome as the dominant power in the central Mediterranean while imposing crushing financial penalties on Carthage. Rome had won its first overseas empire, but Carthage would return, and next time, they would bring Hannibal. The interval between wars witnessed fundamental changes in both powers. Carthaginian recovery efforts focused on Spain, where the Barcid family established what amounted to an independent kingdom, providing resources for renewed conflict. Hannibal Barca's assumption of command in Spain in 221 BC marked the beginning of preparations for the most audacious military campaign in ancient history. Unlike previous Carthaginian commanders who relied primarily on mercenaries, Hannibal created a professional army combining diverse ethnic groups into a cohesive fighting force united by personal loyalty. His siege of Saguntum in 219 BC provided both pretext for war and opportunity to test his army. Hannibal's decision to march overland from Spain to Italy represented one of history's most brilliant strategic concepts, combining surprise with practical advantages of avoiding Roman naval superiority. The army that departed New Carthage in 218 BC consisted of approximately 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, the largest force ever assembled under Carthaginian command. Spanish troops formed the infantry corps, equipped with distinctive weapons including the falcata, a curved sword designed for slashing attacks that could penetrate Roman armor. African infantry trained in Roman tactical formations could impersonate legionary units during battle. Gallic warriors brought their traditional longswords and fierce fighting spirit. The Alpine crossing accomplished during winter onset became legendary for its combination of tactical brilliance and sheer audacity. Hannibal's route required his forces to traverse terrain, challenging even experienced mountain travelers. The army faced geographical obstacles including narrow paths, steep grades, and unstable rock formations, plus attacks by alpine tribes who rolled boulders down mountainsides. The elephants that survived the crossing created enormous psychological impact when they appeared in the Po Valley, as most Romans had never seen these massive beasts. However, most died during the first winter in Italy, though their initial appearance helped convince Gallic tribes to join Hannibal's cause. When Romans finally faced Hannibal in Italy, they would discover they were fighting a military genius who understood their tactics better than they did themselves. The nightmare was about to begin. Hannibal's Italian campaign showcased military genius that would influence warfare for centuries. At Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, he executed a perfect ambush, destroying an entire Roman army. At Cannae in 216 BC, he achieved what military historians consider the perfect battle, a double envelopment that annihilated a Roman force twice the size of his own army. Approximately 50,000 Romans died in a single afternoon, the worst defeat in Roman military history. Hannibal's tactical brilliance seemed unstoppable. Yet Rome refused to surrender. The Senate's response to Cannae demonstrated the Republic's greatest strength, unbreakable determination. They raised new armies from boys and old men, armed slaves, and prepared to fight to the last citizen. Rome's Italian allies, despite Hannibal's brilliance, mostly remained loyal, a testament to the alliance system Rome had built over centuries. Quintus Fabius Maximus developed a new strategy: avoid direct battle, shadow Hannibal's army, and gradually wear him down through attrition. Romans mockingly called him the delayer, but his patient strategy saved Rome. For 13 years, Hannibal remained undefeated in Italy, yet he could not force Rome's surrender. He lacked siege equipment to capture Rome itself, and reinforcements from Carthage never arrived in sufficient numbers. Meanwhile, Rome adapted and learned. Young Publius Cornelius Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics and developed countermeasures. Rather than attacking Hannibal in Italy, Scipio proposed striking Carthage directly, forcing Hannibal to return home to defend his city. The Battle of Zama in 202 BC marked the final confrontation between the two greatest generals of the age. Scipio, having mastered Hannibal's own tactical innovations, defeated the Carthaginian master on African soil. Carthage sued for peace, surrendering Spain, its fleet, and agreeing to massive indemnities. Rome had survived its greatest test and emerged as the Mediterranean's dominant power. The Second Punic War transformed Rome from an Italian power into a world empire. But victory came at terrible cost. Hundreds of thousands dead, Italian countryside devastated, and a generation scarred by total war. The republic that emerged from this crucible was harder, more militarized, and more willing to use overwhelming force against enemies. The age of Roman imperial expansion had begun. The century following Zama witnessed Rome's explosive expansion throughout the Mediterranean. Victory over Macedon and the Seleucid Empire brought Greece and Asia Minor under Roman control. The final destruction of Carthage in 146 BC, the city razed and its territory made a Roman province, eliminated Rome's last major rival. Yet this triumph paradoxically initiated the most turbulent century in Roman history. The vast wealth flowing into Rome from conquered territories fundamentally altered the republic's social foundations, creating unprecedented inequality while undermining the citizen farmer class that formed the backbone of Roman military strength. Successful generals returned from overseas campaigns with enormous personal fortunes, vast numbers of slaves, and armies of veterans whose loyalty belonged more to their commanders than the Roman state. The transformation of Roman agriculture accelerated as wealthy elites acquired massive estates, latifundia, worked by slave labor. These estates, some extending across hundreds of thousands of acres, specialized in cash crops like wine and olive oil, generating substantial profits while displacing small-scale grain farming that had traditionally supported citizen soldiers. The brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus emerged from this social crisis as the first major politicians to challenge directly the senatorial oligarchy's monopoly on power. Born into one of Rome's most distinguished patrician families, the Gracchi possessed the social credentials necessary to champion popular causes. Tiberius Gracchus assumed the tribunate in 133 BC with a comprehensive program designed to address mounting social problems through land redistribution. His proposal to enforce existing laws limiting public land occupation, reclaiming excess holdings for distribution to landless citizens, struck at the heart of senatorial wealth. Senatorial opposition manifested through constitutional obstruction. But when Tiberius convinced the popular assembly to depose a fellow tribune who blocked his reforms, he violated centuries of precedent. The violence that erupted during his final months marked a watershed moment in Roman political development, introducing physical force as legitimate tool for resolving constitutional disputes. During a public assembly, Pontifex Maximus Publius Scipio Nasica organized a senatorial mob that attacked Tiberius and his supporters, killing the tribune along with approximately 300 followers. The assassination shattered the fundamental assumption that Roman citizens were protected from violence by their legal status. Traditional restraints on elite behavior had collapsed. The Republic was beginning to devour itself from within. Gaius Gracchus assumed the tribunate 10 years later in 123 BC with a more comprehensive program that addressed weaknesses in his brother's approach. Rather than focusing solely on land redistribution, Gaius constructed a broad coalition united by opposition to senatorial dominance. His legislation included grain subsidies for urban citizens, public works projects, providing employment, judicial reforms, transferring important courts from senators to equestrians, and colonial programs offering new opportunities for landless citizens. The reforms challenged senatorial monopoly while creating new power centers in Roman politics. The violent end of Gaius Gracchus in 121 BC followed patterns established during his brother's tribunate, but involved even more extensive bloodshed. The Senate passed its first Senatus Consultum Ultimum, a decree authorizing the consul to take any measures necessary to protect the state, effectively declaring martial law. Military action killed Gaius along with approximately 3,000 supporters in street fighting throughout Rome. The aftermath revealed fundamental changes in Roman political culture. The traditional consensus uniting elite and popular interests had shattered, replaced by irreconcilable conflict between populares who appealed to citizen assemblies and optimates who defended senatorial prerogatives. Gaius Marius exemplified the new type of military commander who would dominate late Republican politics through personal armies and veteran loyalty. His consulship in 107 BC coincided with the Jugurthine War in North Africa, providing opportunities for ambitious commanders to demonstrate superior leadership. The military reforms Marius implemented fundamentally altered the Roman army's social composition. Faced with difficulty recruiting through traditional property qualifications, Marius opened military service to landless citizens who would serve for extended periods in exchange for regular pay and promises of land grants upon retirement. This professionalization created armies whose primary loyalty belonged to commanders rather than the Roman state, as generals controlled resources soldiers needed for future security. The transformation from citizen militia to professional force had profound political implications. Marius's consecutive consulships from 104 to 100 BC violated traditional prohibitions, but the Germanic threat provided justification for extraordinary measures. His repeated elections demonstrated that Roman citizens would override constitutional restrictions when faced with existential threats, establishing precedents that later commanders would exploit for personal advancement. The concentration of military authority in single individuals for extended periods undermined the Republican principle of shared power while creating opportunities for ambitious politicians to build independent power bases. The Republic was dying, though few yet recognized the symptoms. The social war that erupted in 91 BC represented the most serious internal threat to Roman power since the Gallic sack, as Italian allies who had contributed substantially to Roman military success demanded citizenship rights repeatedly denied despite loyal service. Italian communities that rebelled possessed substantial military capabilities developed through centuries of cooperation with Roman forces. Allied soldiers had learned Roman tactics while serving alongside legionaries, and many communities could field well-equipped armies led by experienced commanders. The rebels established their own confederation with a capital at Corfinium, demonstrating sophisticated political organization rivaling Roman institutions. Roman victory resulted more from political concessions than military conquest, as the Republic gradually extended citizenship rights to allied communities. The Lex Julia of 90 BC granted citizenship to all allies who had not joined the rebellion, while subsequent legislation extended similar rights to communities that laid down arms. These measures eliminated the fundamental grievance motivating rebellion while preserving Roman territorial integrity. The citizenship extensions fundamentally altered Roman political dynamics by dramatically expanding eligible voters, though practical difficulties of traveling to Rome for participation meant rights remained largely theoretical for most new citizens. Lucius Cornelius Sulla emerged from the social war as Rome's most successful commander and a leading representative of optimate political interests. His appointment to command against Mithridates VI of Pontus provided opportunity to restore his family's fortunes while advancing optimate goals. The conflict between Marius and Sulla over the Mithridatic command marked the first time Roman armies marched on Rome itself, shattering the fundamental taboo separating military and civilian authority. When the popular assembly transferred Sulla's command to Marius, Sulla convinced his legions that their economic interests depended on maintaining their original commander. The soldiers' willingness to violate religious law demonstrated how completely the Marian reforms had altered military loyalty patterns. Sulla's march on Rome in 88 BC encountered minimal resistance as most citizens fled rather than confronting veteran legions. The ease with which military force could override constitutional authorities revealed the Republic's fundamental weakness. Popular assemblies and magistrates possessed no independent military capabilities to resist determined commanders backed by professional armies. The departure of Sulla's legions for Asia created a power vacuum that Marius quickly exploited through unprecedented violence against optimate leaders. Bodies littered Rome's streets as Marian death squads hunted political enemies. The Republic that had survived Hannibal was now tearing itself apart. Civil war had become the new normal, and ambitious men with armies had learned that force could achieve what elections never could. Sulla's return from victorious eastern campaigns in 83 BC initiated an even more systematic program of political purification through infamous proscription lists marking thousands for death. Unlike the chaotic violence of the Marian period, Sulla's purges followed carefully planned procedures designed to eliminate not only political opponents, but entire networks of families who might seek future revenge. The proscription lists posted publicly offered substantial rewards for marked individuals' heads while confiscating their property to fund Sulla's political reorganization. Citizens lived in terror as lists expanded daily, with personal enemies using chaos to settle private scores through false accusations. The wealth confiscated provided Sulla with enormous resources for rewarding supporters and implementing constitutional reforms designed to prevent future popular challenges to senatorial authority. Sulla's veterans received land grants carved from executed enemies' estates, creating a new class of military colonists whose prosperity depended on maintaining the political system their commander had established. Sulla's constitutional settlement attempted to restore traditional republican governance by strengthening senatorial prerogatives while limiting powers of tribunes and popular assemblies. Tribunes were stripped of their ability to propose legislation or hold higher offices, effectively neutering the institution that had served as primary vehicle for popular participation. Despite Sulla's efforts to create a permanent constitutional framework, his retirement in 79 BC immediately triggered renewed conflicts as ambitious politicians sought to dismantle restrictions on their advancement. The dictator's voluntary abdication reflected his genuine belief that institutional reforms could prevent future civil conflicts without requiring permanent autocratic rule. However, the precedents of military intervention and political violence that Sulla himself had established proved more influential than his constitutional innovations. The conflicts that followed demonstrated how easily ambitious politicians could exploit social grievances to build personal military followings. The simultaneous outbreak of the Great Slave Rebellion led by Spartacus in 73 BC created additional challenges while revealing social tensions pervading Italian society. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator with military experience, organized fellow gladiators and agricultural slaves into a formidable army, defeating several Roman forces through superior mobility and desperate courage. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, assumed command after previous commanders suffered humiliating defeats. His use of decimation, executing every 10th man in units showing cowardice, demonstrated extreme measures Roman commanders employed to maintain discipline. The final battle in 71 BC resulted in complete destruction of the slave army, with 6,000 captured slaves crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua as brutal warning against future rebellions. The Republic's problems couldn't be solved by violence alone, but violence was all Rome's leaders seemed to know anymore. The return of both Pompey and Crassus to Italy in 71 BC created a political crisis as both commanders possessed veteran armies and demanded consulships despite failing to meet normal eligibility requirements. The Senate's reluctant agreement to waive constitutional requirements demonstrated how completely military achievement had superseded legal qualifications. The joint consulship of Pompey and Crassus in 70 BC marked systematic dismantling of Sulla's constitutional settlement as the two commanders competed for popular support through dramatic reforms. The restoration of full tribunician powers reversed one of Sulla's most important restrictions. The Lex Gabinia of 67 BC represented revolutionary expansion of individual military authority. Faced with widespread piracy disrupting Mediterranean commerce, the Popular Assembly granted Pompey unprecedented imperium covering the entire Mediterranean basin, with authority over all provincial governors and unlimited resources for anti-piracy operations. This extraordinary command concentrated more power in a single individual than any Roman had previously wielded. Pompey's piracy campaign demonstrated effectiveness of coordinated strategy when applied systematically, succeeding within 3 months through operational zones assigned to subordinate commanders. The Lex Manilia of 66 BC extended Pompey's extraordinary authority to include command against Mithridates VI, adding wealthy eastern provinces to his existing imperium. This appointment violated the principle that no individual should control multiple provinces simultaneously, but popular enthusiasm overcame constitutional objections. Pompey's eastern campaigns established new standards for Roman imperial administration while generating unprecedented wealth for both state treasury and the commanding general's personal fortune. His establishment of new provinces and client relationships extended Roman influence throughout the eastern Mediterranean. During Pompey's absence in the east, Gaius Julius Caesar had been building his own political career through traditional cursus honorum while developing skills that would eventually make him Rome's most successful politician and general. Born into an ancient patrician family, claiming descent from Venus and the Trojan hero Aeneas, Caesar possessed social credentials necessary for advancement while lacking substantial personal wealth. His early career demonstrated exceptional abilities in oratory, legal advocacy, and political manipulation. Caesar's quaestorship in Spain in 69 BC provided first significant exposure to provincial administration and military command, while his aedileship in 65 BC established his reputation for magnificent public spectacles that won popular support despite enormous personal expense. The gladiatorial games and theatrical performances Caesar sponsored far exceeded traditional standards, requiring him to borrow substantial sums that created dangerous financial obligations. But the political benefits of popular acclaim proved worth the risks. A new player had entered the game, and he would prove the most dangerous of all. The formation of the so-called First Triumvirate in 60 BC represented revolutionary development in Roman politics, as 3 of the Republic's most powerful individuals agreed to coordinate activities in pursuit of mutual advantage while bypassing traditional institutional constraints. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus possessed complementary resources and objectives, making cooperation advantageous despite personal rivalries. Caesar needed financial support and political backing for his consular campaign. Pompey required legislative approval for his eastern settlements and veteran land grants. Crassus sought profitable commands that would enhance his military reputation. The secret nature of the alliance reflected participants' recognition that cooperation violated republican principles. Caesar's consulship in 59 BC demonstrated the triumvirate's ability to override constitutional opposition through combination of popular support, financial resources, and organized intimidation. His colleague Marcus Bibulus attempted to obstruct triumviral measures through traditional means, but found himself physically prevented from participating in public business through organized violence. The consulship became known as the Consulship of Julius and Caesar, as Bibulus's name disappeared from public documents and popular consciousness. The land law Caesar pushed through provided Pompey's veterans with agricultural settlements while establishing precedent for large-scale redistribution of public property to military colonists. Caesar's Gallic command secured through the Lex Vatinia provided opportunity to build personal military reputation and financial resources that would make him competitive with his triumviral partners while extending Roman power into previously unconquered territories. The grant of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum for 5 years, later extended to include Transalpine Gaul, gave Caesar access to wealthy provinces and opportunities for military glory. The extended duration violated traditional limitations on provincial appointments while providing time necessary to conduct major campaigns and build veteran loyalty. The Gallic Wars that occupied Caesar from 58 to 50 BC transformed him from politician into legendary military commander, while adding vast territories to the Roman Empire. His campaigns against various Gallic tribes showcased tactical brilliance and strategic vision, but also revealed the ruthless efficiency with which he pursued objectives. The siege of Alesia in 52 BC, where Caesar's forces constructed elaborate double fortifications to besiege Vercingetorix while defending against relief armies, demonstrated Roman engineering capabilities at their peak. Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars, written to justify his actions and maintain political support in Rome, created literary monument that influenced military writing for centuries. But while Caesar conquered Gaul, the triumvirate was collapsing. Crassus died disastrously at Carrhae fighting the Parthians in 53 BC. Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, the personal bond linking the two men, died in childbirth in 54 BC. The stage was set for final confrontation between Caesar and Pompey, and Rome would be the battlefield. The outbreak of civil war in 49 BC resulted from irreconcilable conflict between Caesar's determination to maintain his position and Pompey's alliance with senatorial forces seeking to eliminate Caesar's threat to traditional authority. When the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his armies and return to Rome as private citizen, he faced impossible choice: obey and face prosecution, or defy the Senate and trigger civil war. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon River with his legions in January 49 BC, allegedly declaring "the die is cast," represented the point of no return. By bringing his army across the boundary separating his province from Italy proper, he committed treason against the Roman state. The speed of Caesar's Italian campaign demonstrated both his military genius and the weakness of senatorial opposition. Pompey and most senators fled to Greece to organize resistance, abandoning Italy to Caesar's control. The civil war expanded throughout the Mediterranean as both sides mobilized resources and allies. Caesar's Spanish campaign eliminated Pompeian forces in the west before turning east to confront Pompey directly. The Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC marked the decisive engagement, with Caesar's veteran legions defeating Pompey's numerically superior but less experienced forces through superior tactical coordination. Pompey fled to Egypt seeking refuge, but was assassinated by Egyptian courtiers hoping to curry favor with Caesar. When Caesar arrived in pursuit, he received Pompey's severed head, a sight that allegedly moved him to tears for his former friend and son-in-law. Caesar's Egyptian sojourn involved him in dynastic disputes, leading to famous relationship with Cleopatra VII and installation of her regime. His famous declaration, "Veni, vidi, vici," "I came, I saw, I conquered," summarized his rapid victory over Pharnaces II of Pontus during this period. Caesar's return to Rome as undisputed master of the Roman world raised fundamental questions about the Republic's future. His accumulation of offices and honors, dictator, consul, tribune, violated every principle of shared authority, while his veterans expected rewards that could only come through confiscations and redistribution. His limited reforms, calendar reorganization, debt relief, extension of citizenship, demonstrated both his administrative talents and the fundamental incompatibility between one-man rule and republican traditions. The senators who gathered around him on the Ides of March 44 BC believed they were saving the republic by eliminating its would-be king. Led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, approximately 60 conspirators participated in Caesar's assassination in the theater of Pompey. But they had miscalculated catastrophically. Killing Caesar didn't restore the Republic. It destroyed the last hope for peaceful transition. What followed would be even bloodier than what came before. The assassination of Julius Caesar created immediate power vacuum threatening to plunge Rome into another devastating civil war. The conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius had eliminated the Republic's most powerful individual, but possessed no coherent plan for governance. Their naive assumption that removing the dictator would automatically restore traditional Republican government ignored fundamental changes that decades of civil conflict had wrought in Roman society. Marcus Antonius, Caesar's most trusted lieutenant and fellow consul, initially appeared positioned to inherit the dictator's political legacy through control of government machinery. However, Caesar's will revealed unexpected complication. The dictator had adopted his 18-year-old grandnephew Gaius Octavius as his son and principal heir, bequeathing enormous personal wealth and the politically invaluable name Caesar. The young man, who became known as Octavian, possessed no military experience and minimal political connections, but his legal status as Caesar's son provided claims to leadership that Antony could not ignore. Octavian's arrival in Rome demonstrated remarkable political sophistication for someone barely out of adolescence. Rather than deferring to Antony's seniority, the young heir immediately began asserting his rights as Caesar's son while building independent support among groups that had benefited from the dictator's policies. His adoption of the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus signaled determination to claim his predecessor's full political inheritance. The competition between Antony and Octavian created opportunities for other ambitious politicians, while the Senate attempted to exploit divisions among Caesar's heirs. Led by elderly Cicero, senators sought to use Octavian as weapon against Antony while maintaining ultimate control over both young men. Cicero's Philippic orations, modeled on Demosthenes' speeches against Philip of Macedon, represented some of finest oratory in Latin literature while demonstrating continued power of eloquent rhetoric. However, Cicero's speeches also revealed depth of personal hatred that had developed between former allies. The formation of the Second Triumvirate in November 43 BC represented cynical abandonment of republican principles by three ambitious politicians who recognized that cooperation served their interests better than continued conflict. Unlike the secret alliance binding Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, the new triumvirate received formal legal recognition through the Lex Titia, which granted Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus extraordinary powers for restoring the Republic over 5 years. This legislation effectively suspended normal constitutional government while providing triumvirs with unlimited authority. The proscription lists the triumvirs published immediately demonstrated their willingness to employ systematic terror. The inclusion of Cicero's name reflected Antony's personal hatred. The orator's severed head and hands were displayed on the rostra where he had delivered his greatest speeches. Rome had become a charnel house, where political disagreement meant death, but from this blood-soaked chaos would emerge a new order that would last 5 centuries. The Philippi campaign of 42 BC eliminated the last organized republican opposition while establishing triumviral control over the Roman world through decisive military victory over Caesar's assassins. Brutus and Cassius had spent 2 years building substantial armies in eastern provinces while accumulating financial resources necessary for sustained operations. The battlefield at Philippi in Macedonia provided terrain favoring defensive tactics while allowing both armies to deploy full strength. The two battles fought within 20 days demonstrated tactical evolution that had occurred in Roman military practice. The first battle saw Brutus defeating Octavian's forces while Antony simultaneously crushed Cassius's army, creating tactical stalemate. The decisive second battle resulted from Antony's superior understanding of soldier psychology and ability to maintain unit cohesion during complex maneuvers. The division of the Roman world that followed reflected triumvirs' recognition that their alliance remained fundamentally unstable and required geographical separation to prevent immediate conflict. Antony received wealthy eastern provinces where he could pursue military glory against Parthia while enjoying luxurious lifestyle appealing to his tastes. Octavian obtained more challenging western territories, including Italy, where he would face difficult task of settling veterans. Lepidus received Africa, a relatively minor assignment reflecting his junior status. The personal animosity and competing ambitions that would eventually destroy the triumvirate were already apparent. Antony's eastern command provided access to enormous wealth and military resources of Hellenistic kingdoms, while positioning him to pursue Parthian campaigns that had been Caesar's next major objective. His relationship with Cleopatra VII of Egypt combined personal attraction with practical political advantages, strengthening his position throughout Eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra's alliance with Antony represented calculated political decision by the Egyptian queen to secure her kingdom's independence while gaining access to Roman military protection. Her control over Egypt's vast agricultural wealth and strategic position made her valuable ally for any Roman commander seeking to establish independent power in the region. Meanwhile, Octavian faced enormous challenge of implementing triumviral land redistribution while maintaining political stability in Italy. The settlement of over 100,000 veterans required confiscating property from existing landowners, creating widespread resentment and occasional armed resistance. Octavian's success in managing these difficulties while building personal loyalty among both veterans and dispossessed civilians demonstrated political skills surpassing those of his more experienced colleagues. The propaganda war that preceded final confrontation demonstrated importance of public opinion in determining civil conflict outcomes. Octavian's supporters portrayed their leader as defender of traditional Roman values against Eastern decadence, while presenting Antony as traitor who had abandoned his Roman identity for Oriental luxury and monarchical ambitions. This campaign proved remarkably effective in Italy, where citizens were already suspicious of Eastern influences. The pieces were moving into position for history's final great naval battle, and when the fleets met at Actium, the fate of the ancient world would be decided. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC marked the climactic naval engagement that would determine whether the Roman world would be ruled from Rome or Alexandria, whether republican traditions would survive in any form, or whether open monarchy would replace centuries of shared governance. The confrontation off the western coast of Greece pitted Octavian's fleet under command of Marcus Agrippa against Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces in what became less a battle than a catastrophic collapse of Antony's position. When Cleopatra's ships broke away from the engagement and sailed for Egypt, Antony abandoned his fleet to follow her, leaving his forces leaderless and demoralized. The psychological impact of Antony's flight proved as devastating as any tactical maneuver. His remaining forces, recognizing their commander had abandoned them, quickly surrendered to Octavian. Antony and Cleopatra's subsequent suicides in Alexandria in 30 BC eliminated the last obstacles to Octavian's undisputed control over the entire Roman world. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and Egypt's incorporation as a Roman province, the richest prize in the Mediterranean. At age 32, Octavian stood alone atop the Roman world. Nearly a century of civil wars had finally ended. The question now was what would come next. Octavian's transformation into Augustus marked the creation of a new political system that preserved republican forms while concentrating real power in the hands of one man. In 27 BC, Octavian ostentatiously restored the Republic, returning powers to Senate and people while retaining for himself carefully selected authorities that provided actual control. The Senate granted him the title Augustus, the revered one, a religious honorific that avoided the hated word king, while elevating him above ordinary citizens. His accumulation of traditional republican offices, tribune's power to protect citizens and veto legislation, proconsular command over provinces containing most legions, Pontifex Maximus controlling state religion, created a constitutional fig leaf covering autocratic reality. The genius of Augustus's settlement lay in its subtlety. He ruled as first among equals, princeps, rather than dictator or king. He consulted the Senate, maintained republican ceremonies, and claimed to serve the state rather than dominate it. This constitutional camouflage allowed him to establish hereditary monarchy while avoiding the fate that had befallen Julius Caesar. The reality beneath the Republican veneer was clear. Augustus controlled the armies, the treasury, and the succession. He was emperor in all but name, and Rome would never again be a republic. The Pax Romana that Augustus established through military might and administrative genius provided Mediterranean world with unprecedented peace and prosperity. His reorganization of provincial administration reduced corruption, while his military reforms created professional army capable of defending empire's vast frontiers. The construction projects he sponsored throughout Rome transformed the city from brick to marble, creating urban grandeur matching its imperial status. His famous boast, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble," captured his transformative impact. But perhaps his greatest achievement was dying peacefully in bed in 14 AD after 41 years of rule, having established a system that would endure for centuries. The Republic was dead. Long live the empire! The Julio-Claudian dynasty that succeeded Augustus demonstrated both the stability of the imperial system and the catastrophic consequences when incompetent or insane individuals inherited absolute power. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson and chosen successor, ruled competently, but became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn, eventually retiring to Capri and governing through letters. His reign established the dangerous precedent that emperors could be virtual prisoners of their own security concerns, surrounded by sycophants and unable to trust anyone. The ascension of Caligula in 37 AD brought to power a young man whose mental instability would shock even Romans accustomed to autocratic excess. His alleged appointment of his horse as consul, his declaration of his own divinity, and his systematic persecution of senators revealed the fundamental weakness of the Augustan system. No mechanism existed to remove an insane emperor except assassination. Claudius, elevated by the Praetorian Guard after Caligula's murder, proved surprisingly competent despite his physical disabilities and the contempt with which he had been treated by his family. His conquest of Britain in 43 AD extended Roman power to the edge of the known world, while his administrative reforms improved provincial governance. However, his weakness for his wives, particularly the notorious Agrippina, demonstrated how imperial succession could be manipulated by ambitious women and courtiers. Nero's reign began with promise under guidance of the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, but descended into theatrical excess and murderous paranoia. His execution of his mother Agrippina, his first wife Octavia, and countless others, combined with his obsession with performing as actor and musician, alienated both elite and military. When he faced military revolt in 68 AD, he fled Rome and committed suicide, ending the Julio-Claudian line. His death precipitated the Year of the Four Emperors, a brutal civil war demonstrating that Augustus's constitutional settlement could not survive dynastic failure. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian competed for imperial power in rapid succession, their struggles revealing that emperors were made by armies, not constitutional procedures. Vespasian's eventual victory in 69 AD established the Flavian dynasty and restored stability, but the crisis had exposed the empire's fundamental vulnerability. The purple was won through military force, and any general with loyal legions could claim it. Vespasian proved an excellent emperor, restoring imperial finances depleted by Nero's extravagance and civil war costs. His construction of the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum, symbolized both his dynasty's power and his commitment to providing spectacular entertainment for Rome's population. His son Titus ruled briefly but competently, responding effectively to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD and a devastating fire in Rome in 80 AD. But his brother Domitian's autocratic rule and eventual assassination in 96 AD again raised questions about succession and imperial stability. The first century of empire had demonstrated both the system's capacity for providing stable governance and its terrifying vulnerability when power passed to unworthy hands. The adoption of Nerva in 96 AD, following Domitian's assassination, initiated what historians celebrate as Rome's Golden Age, the era of the five good emperors, when the principle of adoptive succession elevated the most qualified candidates rather than relying on biological inheritance. Nerva's brief reign established the pattern: childless or willing to pass over biological sons. Each emperor adopted the most capable administrator or general as successor, ensuring competent leadership across 5 reigns spanning nearly a century. Trajan, adopted by Nerva and ruling from 98 to 117 AD, represented the ideal: a Spanish-born soldier who proved equally capable as military commander and civilian administrator. Trajan's Dacian Wars demonstrated Rome's continuing capacity for aggressive territorial expansion while showcasing Roman engineering prowess. The bridge across the Danube, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus, and the systematic reduction of Dacian mountain fortresses revealed sophisticated technical capabilities. The wealth captured during these campaigns, enormous quantities of Dacian gold and silver, funded unprecedented building programs including Trajan's Forum, Column, and markets that transformed Rome's urban landscape. His eastern campaigns, though ultimately abandoned by his successor, briefly extended Roman control to the Persian Gulf, marking the empire's greatest territorial extent. Hadrian's succession in 117 AD brought to power an intellectual and cultural sophisticate who recognized that the empire had reached the limits of sustainable expansion. His comprehensive tour of the provinces, spending over half his 21-year reign traveling, demonstrated unprecedented imperial commitment to understanding local conditions. Hadrian's Wall in Britain, stretching 73 miles across northern England, represented the most substantial frontier fortification ever built by Roman forces, while symbolizing the shift from expansion to consolidation. His architectural projects throughout the empire, the Pantheon reconstruction in Rome, the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens, his villa at Tivoli, showcased the cosmopolitan character of imperial civilization. Antoninus Pius's peaceful 23-year reign from 138 to 161 AD represented the culmination of the Pax Romana. The empire enjoyed unprecedented prosperity while maintaining defensive capabilities without major military campaigns. His decision to govern primarily from Rome rather than conducting extensive provincial tours reflected confidence that administrative systems could function effectively without constant imperial oversight. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor ruling from 161 to 180 AD, brought Stoic principles to imperial governance while facing renewed barbarian pressure along northern frontiers and a devastating plague that decimated the population. His meditations, philosophical reflections written during military campaigns, revealed the intellectual depth and moral seriousness he brought to governance. But his decision to name his biological son Commodus as successor rather than adopting a more qualified candidate proved catastrophic, ending the Golden Age and initiating the empire's long decline. The lesson was clear. The adoptive principle worked magnificently, but required selfless emperors willing to prioritize the empire's welfare over dynastic ambitions. And such selflessness, it turned out, was rare. Commodus's reign from 180 to 192 AD revealed the dangers of hereditary succession when an incompetent ruler inherited absolute power. Unlike his philosophically minded father, Commodus displayed little interest in administrative duties, preferring to spend time participating in gladiatorial contests that scandalized traditional Roman sensibilities. His obsession with personal combat in the arena violated every principle of imperial dignity while demonstrating complete disconnection from leadership responsibilities. Contemporary sources record he participated in over 700 gladiatorial contests, often appearing as Hercules complete with lion skin and club, performances that horrified senators who viewed such behavior as fundamentally incompatible with imperial authority. The emperor's neglect of governmental duties created opportunities for ambitious courtiers to pursue their own interests, while imperial administration gradually lost control over provincial affairs. Cleander, a freedman serving as praetorian prefect, effectively governed the empire for several years while accumulating enormous personal wealth through systematic sale of offices and legal decisions. This corruption reached unprecedented levels as senatorial positions, provincial governorships, and even consulships were auctioned to highest bidders regardless of qualifications. The conspiracy that eliminated Commodus on New Year's Eve 192 AD involved his closest associates who concluded that the emperor's erratic behavior threatened their survival as well as the empire's stability. The assassination initiated the Year of the Five Emperors as military commanders throughout the empire competed for power through civil warfare lasting 5 years. Septimius Severus, commanding the Pannonian legions, possessed the strongest military position and eventually prevailed, but the conflicts revealed that imperial authority depended entirely on military support. Severus's famous deathbed advice to his sons, "Enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else," encapsulated the political philosophy that would govern imperial policy for the next century. This militarization of government reflected practical recognition that political survival depended on army loyalty, but it also encouraged military intervention in political affairs while alienating civilian populations. The Severan dynasty's expansion of the army increased military capabilities while creating enormous fiscal pressures, contributing to the economic crisis of following decades. Caracalla's Constitutio Antoniniana of 212 AD, granting Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants, represented the culmination of legal integration while creating new fiscal opportunities for imperial government. However, the reform's primary motivation appears to have been financial rather than idealistic, as new citizens became liable for inheritance taxes previously applying only to Roman citizens. The rapid succession of emperors following Caracalla's assassination in 217 AD, Macrinus, Elagabalus, Alexander Severus, demonstrated complete breakdown of institutional mechanisms for peaceful succession, while revealing the empire's growing dependence on military commanders who possessed neither experience nor inclination to address complex administrative challenges. When Alexander Severus was assassinated by his own troops in 235 AD, initiating the period historians term the crisis of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire entered 5 decades of political chaos, economic collapse, and territorial fragmentation that nearly destroyed the imperial system. Everything Rome had built over 8 centuries seemed on the verge of complete collapse. The crisis of the 3rd century witnessed the empire's near disintegration as military commanders competed for imperial power through constant civil warfare, while external enemies exploited Roman weakness. Between 235 and 284 AD, over 50 men claimed imperial authority, most ruling only briefly before being assassinated by rivals or their own troops. This rapid turnover eliminated experienced administrators while preventing coherent long-term policy implementation. Maximinus Thrax's elevation by soldiers in 235 AD established patterns characterizing the soldier emperors. Military commanders focused primarily on maintaining army loyalty while neglecting civilian administration and economic policies necessary for imperial stability. The Germanic invasions that intensified during this period represented a new type of barbarian threat. Gothic peoples had developed naval capabilities allowing them to bypass Roman frontier defenses while conducting devastating raids throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Their ability to construct fleets and coordinate amphibious operations demonstrated sophisticated organizational capabilities exceeding previous barbarian achievements. The psychological impact of seeing barbarian forces operating freely in regions that had enjoyed centuries of peace created panic among civilian populations while undermining confidence in imperial protective capabilities. The capture of Emperor Valerian by Persian forces in 260 AD, the only Roman emperor ever taken prisoner by external enemies, symbolized the depth of imperial humiliation. The plague outbreaks coinciding with these military and political crises created additional demographic and economic pressures. Disease spread rapidly along trade routes and military supply lines, killing substantial portions of populations in affected regions while disrupting agricultural production. The combination of plague mortality, military casualties, and civilian displacement created labor shortages, reducing tax revenues while increasing costs of maintaining essential government services. The emergence of breakaway states during the 260s represented the logical culmination of imperial fragmentation. The Gallic Empire controlled Britain, Gaul, and parts of Germany for over a decade, while the Palmyrene Empire under Zenobia extended authority over Syria, Egypt, and much of Asia Minor. These separatist movements attracted support from provincial populations who had lost confidence in the central government's ability to provide security and effective administration. The separatist states demonstrated that the imperial system had become too large and complex for centralized control during crisis periods. Individual regions could defend themselves more effectively under local leadership than by waiting for help from distant emperors preoccupied with civil wars and other emergencies. The recovery of lost territories by Emperors Aurelian and Probus in the 270s restored nominal unity, but the fundamental problems remained unresolved. The empire needed comprehensive reorganization if it was to survive. That reorganization would come from an unlikely source, a Dalmatian soldier named Diocles, who would transform himself into Diocletian and reinvent the Roman Empire. Diocletian's accession in 284 AD marked the beginning of the most comprehensive reorganization of imperial government since Augustus established the Principate. Born in Dalmatia and risen through military ranks during the chaotic decades of crisis, the new emperor possessed both extensive administrative experience and systematic approach to governance, enabling him to address fundamental structural problems. His early career had included service in various provincial commands, where he observed firsthand the breakdown of traditional administrative mechanisms and growing disconnect between central authority and local needs. This practical experience led him to conclude that the empire had grown too large for effective management by a single ruler operating from a fixed capital. The administrative reforms Diocletian implemented beginning in 285 AD represented complete reconceptualization of imperial governance based on the principle that effective administration required both geographical decentralization and hierarchical specialization. He divided the empire into 4 major territorial units, each governed by a ruler with specific responsibilities. This system, termed the Tetrarchy or Rule of 4, assigned 2 senior emperors called Augusti primary responsibility for major policy decisions, while 2 junior emperors designated Caesars handled routine administration and served as designated successors. Diocletian retained personal control over eastern territories, establishing his capital at Nicomedia in Bithynia, where he could monitor both the Persian frontier and vital grain supplies from Egypt. Maximian, Diocletian's trusted colleague and co-Augustus, received responsibility for western provinces including Italy, Africa, and Spain, establishing headquarters at Mediolanum, where he could coordinate responses to Germanic incursions. The 2 Caesars appointed to complete the tetrarchal system brought additional military expertise and regional knowledge. Constantius Chlorus, assigned to govern Gaul and Britain, had demonstrated exceptional administrative abilities, while Galerius, who received the Danubian provinces and responsibility for Persian frontier defense, represented the new generation of professional military commanders. The military reforms accompanying administrative reorganization addressed fundamental weaknesses in Roman defensive strategy while creating more flexible force structures. Diocletian increased overall army size to approximately 650,000 men, nearly doubling forces available during the Antonine period, while reorganizing military units to emphasize mobility and specialized capabilities. The distinction between limitani stationed permanently along frontier zones and comitatenses, providing mobile field armies, reflected understanding that effective frontier defense required both static forces maintaining fortified positions and mobile reserves responding rapidly to major incursions. The price controls established through Diocletian's edict on maximum prices represented one of the most ambitious attempts at economic regulation in ancient history. The edict established maximum prices for over 1,000 different goods and services while prescribing severe penalties for violators. However, practical implementation proved far more difficult than theoretical conception, as merchants responded by reducing quality, creating shortages, or shifting activities to unregulated sectors. The reforms stabilized the empire temporarily, but could not address the fundamental demographic and economic decline that had been accelerating for over a century. The Great Persecution that began in 303 AD represented Diocletian's most controversial policy, demonstrating his determination to restore traditional Roman religious practices while eliminating what he viewed as threats to imperial unity. The persecution's origins lay in the emperor's conviction that the empire's recent troubles resulted from the gods' anger over the spread of Christianity. The initial edicts focused on destroying Christian scriptures and churches while removing Christians from government positions. But the campaign gradually escalated to include imprisonment, torture, and execution of religious leaders who refused to participate in traditional sacrificial ceremonies. The systematic nature of the persecution reflected administrative capabilities Diocletian had developed, as imperial officials throughout the empire received detailed instructions for identifying Christians and compelling participation in traditional ceremonies. However, the resistance Christian communities offered revealed both the depth of religious conviction and the sophisticated organizational structures that had emerged within churches. The willingness of many Christians to accept imprisonment, torture, and death rather than participate in traditional ceremonies demonstrated strength of commitment imperial authorities had underestimated. The economic and social disruptions caused by persecution created additional problems while failing to achieve religious unity Diocletian sought. Diocletian's abdication in 305 AD, accompanied by Maximian's simultaneous retirement, represented an unprecedented attempt to ensure peaceful imperial succession through voluntary power transfer to designated Caesars. The elaborate ceremony conducted at Nicomedia emphasized the emperor's personal sacrifice while demonstrating confidence that the tetrarchal system could function without his direct leadership. However, the succession arrangements that elevated Constantius and Galerius while appointing Severus and Maximinus Daia as new Caesars created resentments that would soon undermine the careful balance Diocletian had established. The exclusion of Constantine and Maxentius, sons of the retiring emperors, reflected the tetrarchal principle that merit should determine advancement rather than hereditary claims, but it ignored the powerful appeals that dynastic legitimacy continued to exercise. Constantine's proclamation as Augustus by his father's troops in York following Constantius's death in 306 AD initiated civil wars that would ultimately destroy the tetrarchal system while bringing to power the emperor who would transform the empire's religious and political foundations. His elevation violated established succession procedures while demonstrating that military loyalty to imperial families remained stronger than institutional commitments. Maxentius's simultaneous revolt in Rome created additional complications while revealing the continuing importance of the ancient capital despite administrative decentralization. Constantine's victory over Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD marked a decisive turning point in both civil wars and religious development. The famous vision Constantine reported experiencing, involving a cross of light and the words "in this sign, conquer," became central to later Christian interpretations while reflecting the emperor's growing interest in religious symbolism. His adoption of Christian symbols for his army standards marked a dramatic shift in imperial religious policy while providing visible demonstration of his religious orientation. The transformation of the Roman Empire from pagan to Christian state had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The Edict of Milan, issued jointly by Constantine and Licinius in 313 AD, established legal framework for religious tolerance throughout the empire while effectively ending persecution policies. The edict proclaimed that all inhabitants should have freedom to follow whatever religious practices they preferred, while specifically restoring property confiscated from Christian communities. This policy represented fundamental shift from traditional Roman approach viewing religious conformity as essential for maintaining divine favor and political unity. Constantine's personal involvement in Christian affairs extended far beyond legal establishment of tolerance to include active participation in theological disputes and ecclesiastical organization. His convocation of the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD represented the first attempt by imperial government to resolve doctrinal controversies through systematic theological deliberation. The council's proceedings, conducted in the emperor's presence and with his active participation, established precedents for imperial involvement in religious affairs that would characterize Byzantine governance for the next millennium. The Arian controversy prompting the Nicene Council reflected fundamental disagreements about Christ's relationship to God the Father. The Nicene Creed that emerged established Orthodox Christian doctrine through carefully crafted language affirming Christ's full divinity while maintaining monotheistic principles. Constantine's foundation of Constantinople in 330 AD on the site of ancient Byzantium created a new imperial capital that would become the center of Christian civilization for over 1,000 years. The city's strategic location controlling the Bosphorus Strait provided unparalleled defensive advantages, while its magnificent churches and palaces symbolized the fusion of Roman imperial power with Christian religious authority. The construction of the Church of the Holy Apostles, where Constantine would eventually be buried alongside relics of the apostles, demonstrated his determination to create a Christian imperial capital that would eclipse Rome's pagan associations. The death of Constantine in 337 AD initiated a succession crisis as his 3 surviving sons divided the empire while systematically eliminating potential rivals through violence. The massacre of Constantine's relatives demonstrated the continuing importance of dynastic bloodshed in imperial succession. The conflicts between Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans resulted in civil warfare that weakened imperial defenses while barbarian peoples pressed against frontiers. Julian the Apostate's brief reign from 361 to 363 AD represented the last systematic effort to restore traditional Roman religion. His philosophical education and personal conviction that the empire's troubles resulted from abandoning traditional gods led him to implement comprehensive religious reforms, restoring pagan temples and eliminating Christian privileges. However, his death during the Persian campaign in 363 AD ended the most serious attempt to reverse Christianization. The soldiers' selection of Jovian, a Christian officer, as Julian's successor reflected their recognition that religious policies had become less important than military competence. The empire was irreversibly Christian, and the pagan gods would never return to their former glory. The formal division of imperial authority between Valentinian I and his brother Valens in 364 AD established the institutional framework that would govern Roman territories for the remainder of their existence. Valentinian's administration in the West focused on strengthening Rhine defenses, while Valens faced the challenge of managing Gothic peoples displaced by Hunnic expansion seeking permission to cross the Danube. The emperor's decision to accept these refugees reflected both humanitarian concerns and practical calculations about potential military and economic benefits of barbarian settlement. However, corruption and incompetence of Roman officials responsible for managing Gothic immigration created conditions leading to the most serious military disaster since Cannae. The Gothic War, erupting in 377 AD, resulted from systematic mistreatment of barbarian refugees by administrators who viewed newcomers as opportunities for personal enrichment. The Goths' desperation, created by inadequate food supplies and abusive treatment, led them to revolt against Roman authority, while their military capabilities, enhanced by service as Roman allies, made them formidable opponents. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD marked the most catastrophic Roman defeat in centuries, as Valens's army was virtually annihilated by Gothic forces employing superior tactical coordination. The emperor's death during battle eliminated experienced leadership while leaving the Eastern Empire without adequate military forces. Theodosius III's elevation to Eastern imperial authority in 379 AD brought to power an emperor whose political skills enabled him to rebuild Eastern defenses through diplomatic as well as military means. His negotiation of a treaty with Gothic leaders granting them federate status within the empire represented revolutionary departure from traditional policies toward barbarian peoples. This agreement acknowledged Gothic autonomy while incorporating their military capabilities into imperial defensive arrangements, creating precedents for barbarian kingdoms that would eventually replace Roman administration in western provinces. The federate system provided solutions to immediate military problems while creating long-term challenges for imperial authority. The permanent division of the empire between Theodosius's sons Arcadius and Honorius in 395 AD established the institutional framework that would govern Roman territories for the remainder of their existence. This division reflected practical recognition that the empire's size exceeded administrative capabilities of any single ruler, while creating mechanisms for specialized responses to regional challenges. However, the separation also eliminated coordinated strategic planning while encouraging competition between Eastern and Western governments for limited resources. The Gothic Wars that erupted under Alaric's leadership represented the logical culmination of the federate system's contradictions, as barbarian leaders who had served Rome faithfully demanded rewards and recognition that the imperial government was unwilling or unable to provide. When Alaric's forces sacked Rome in 410 AD, the psychological impact shocked the Mediterranean world. The Eternal City had fallen to barbarians for the first time in 8 centuries. Nothing seemed permanent anymore, and nothing seemed safe. The sack of Rome by Alaric's forces in 410 AD, though brief and relatively restrained, marked a psychological watershed that undermined confidence in imperial protective capabilities. The event's impact extended far beyond immediate military significance to encompass fundamental questions about the empire's survival. The rise of powerful Germanic generals like Stilicho and later Ricimer represented the militarization of imperial politics and growing dependence on barbarian commanders for essential governmental functions. Stilicho's Vandal origins and effective leadership showed that ethnic background had become less important than military competence, but his assassination in 408 AD eliminated experienced leadership during critical period. Ricimer's domination of Western imperial politics illustrated complete subordination of civilian authority to military commanders who possessed neither cultural background nor political inclination to maintain traditional Roman governmental practices. His ability to make and unmake emperors at will demonstrated that imperial authority had become largely ceremonial, while real power rested with barbarian commanders controlling professional armies. The Vandal conquest of North Africa under Gaiseric eliminated the Western Empire's wealthiest provinces while demonstrating effectiveness of barbarian naval operations. The loss of African tax revenues and grain supplies created fiscal and logistical crises, undermining the Western government's capacity to maintain adequate military forces. The Hunnic Empire that Attila created during the mid-5th century represented the most serious external threat since the Persian Wars. His campaigns in Gaul and Italy required coordinated responses by both Eastern and Western governments while demonstrating the continuing importance of diplomatic skill in managing barbarian relations. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 AD, where a coalition of Romans and barbarian federates halted Attila's advance into Gaul, demonstrated that effective leadership could still mobilize imperial resources for major operations. However, Attila's death in 453 AD eliminated the immediate threat while creating opportunities for other barbarian leaders to expand territorial control. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus by Odoacer in 476 AD marked the end of Western imperial authority while establishing precedent for barbarian kingdoms that would govern former Roman territories. The Germanic general's decision to rule Italy as nominal representative of the Eastern Emperor rather than claiming imperial authority directly reflected both practical political considerations and continuing prestige associated with Roman legitimacy. However, his effective independence from Eastern control demonstrated that imperial division had created irreversible fragmentation, while barbarian kingdoms had replaced Roman administration as the dominant political form in Western Europe. The transformation of the Roman Empire from unified Mediterranean state into collection of barbarian kingdoms and the surviving Eastern Empire represented one of history's most significant political transitions. The Western Empire's collapse resulted not from sudden military conquest, but from gradual institutional decay, demographic decline, and successful adaptation of barbarian peoples to Roman political and military culture. The Eastern Empire's survival, eventually evolving into the Byzantine Empire, demonstrated that Roman institutions retained vitality when properly adapted to changing circumstances. The story that began with 7 hills above the Tiber had come full circle. The Eternal City was no longer eternal, and the empire that had conquered the world had finally fallen. But in falling, Rome had transformed everything it touched, and its legacy would echo through the ages. The legacy of Roman imperial civilization extended far beyond the political boundaries of the empire itself. Roman law, codified systematically over centuries, provided foundations for legal systems throughout Western civilization. The concept of written law accessible to all citizens, the distinction between civil and criminal offenses, the presumption of innocence, and countless other principles originated in Roman legal thought would influence jurisprudence for millennia. The Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled under Byzantine Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, preserved Roman legal wisdom and transmitted it to medieval and modern Europe. Roman engineering achievements demonstrated technical capabilities that would not be equaled for over 1,000 years. The aqueducts, bringing fresh water to cities across the empire, represented marvels of hydraulic engineering. Some, like the Pont du Gard in southern France, still stand as monuments to Roman ingenuity. The road network connecting provinces from Britain to Mesopotamia facilitated trade, military movement, and cultural exchange while establishing transportation infrastructure that medieval and even modern societies would continue to use. The famous Roman concrete, whose recipe was lost after the empire's fall and only recently rediscovered, produced structures like the Pantheon, whose dome remains the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome after 2 millennia. Latin, the language of Roman administration and literature, evolved into the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, spoken by hundreds of millions today. More importantly, Latin served as the language of learning, law, and religion throughout medieval Europe, providing common linguistic foundation that transcended political boundaries. The classical Latin literature produced during the Empire, Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's Metamorphoses, Cicero's philosophical works, Seneca's essays, Tacitus's histories, shaped Western literary traditions while preserving knowledge of ancient thought for future generations. Roman military organization and tactics influenced warfare for centuries. The concept of professional standing armies with standardized training and equipment, the use of engineering in military operations, the importance of logistics and supply lines, and countless tactical innovations originated in Roman military practice. Medieval and early modern armies consciously imitated Roman models, while military theorists from Machiavelli to Napoleon studied Roman campaigns for strategic insights. The very word military derives from Latin miles, meaning soldier. The architectural legacy proved equally profound. The basilica form developed for Roman public buildings became the model for Christian churches throughout Europe. The triumphal arch, celebrating military victories, inspired countless imitations from medieval times through the 20th century. The use of vaults, domes, and arches in monumental architecture drew directly on Roman engineering innovations. Renaissance architects like Brunelleschi and Palladio studied Roman buildings and adapted classical principles to create new architectural styles that would dominate Western building for centuries. Even today, government buildings from Washington to Wellington consciously evoke Roman architectural forms to convey authority and permanence. Subscribe to Flow of History to explore how Rome's influence shaped the medieval world and continues to impact our lives today. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Roman administration in the West preserved substantial elements of Roman governmental structure while adapting these institutions to local conditions and Germanic political traditions. The Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy under Theodoric the Great maintained Roman administrative systems, employed Roman bureaucrats, and preserved classical culture even while ruled by Germanic warriors. The Visigothic kingdom in Spain similarly blended Roman legal traditions with Germanic customs. The Frankish kingdom in Gaul, which would eventually evolve into medieval France and Germany, maintained Roman administrative divisions while adopting Latin as its official language. This synthesis of Roman and barbarian elements created foundations for medieval European civilization. The Christian Church emerged as Rome's most enduring legacy, preserving classical learning through the so-called Dark Ages while providing institutional continuity across political upheavals. The Roman Catholic Church maintained Latin as its liturgical language, adopted Roman administrative structures for its hierarchy, and preserved Roman legal principles in canon law. Monasteries scattered throughout Europe served as repositories of classical knowledge, with monks laboriously copying ancient manuscripts and thereby saving works that would otherwise have been lost forever. The concept of universal authority transcending local kingdoms, central to medieval political thought, derived directly from the Roman imperial ideal. The Eastern Roman Empire, what historians call the Byzantine Empire, survived for another 1,000 years after the West's collapse, finally falling to Ottoman Turks in 1453 AD. Throughout this millennium, Constantinople preserved Greek and Roman learning, maintained sophisticated governmental systems inherited from classical antiquity, and saw itself as the legitimate continuation of Roman imperial authority. Byzantine scholars fleeing the Ottoman conquest brought classical manuscripts to Italy, helping spark the Italian Renaissance and reintroducing Western Europe to Greek philosophy and science. The double-headed eagle of the Byzantine Empire would be adopted by Russia, the Holy Roman Empire, and other states claiming Roman succession. The very concept of empire as political system derives from Roman precedent. From Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire to Napoleon's French Empire to the British Empire to modern superpowers, political entities claiming to unite diverse peoples under single authority consciously or unconsciously imitate the Roman model. The idea that a single civilization could incorporate multiple ethnicities, languages, and cultures under common legal and governmental framework, multiculturalism itself, originated in Roman imperial practice. The tension between centralized authority and local autonomy, between universal law and particular custom, continues to animate political discourse worldwide. The story of Rome, from 7 modest hills to mastery of the known world, from republic to empire, from pagan to Christian, from marble grandeur to Gothic destruction, remains one of history's most compelling narratives. It demonstrates both the heights human civilization can achieve and the inevitable challenges facing all political systems, regardless of apparent strength and permanence. Rome's rise took centuries of patient expansion, military innovation, and political adaptation. Its fall resulted from accumulated problems: demographic decline, economic instability, military overextension, and the inability to integrate barbarian peoples successfully into imperial structures. Yet in falling, Rome transformed the world. The empire that began as a collection of hilltop villages became the civilization that shaped Western law, language, architecture, engineering, military science, and political thought. 15 centuries after the last Western emperor's deposition, we still live in Rome's shadow, still employ concepts and institutions Romans developed, still study their history to understand our own civilization's possibilities and limitations. This is the eternal flow of history. Empires rise and fall, but their legacies endure, shaping future ages in ways their creators could never have imagined. Sleep well, and remember, though Rome fell, Rome never truly died. It lives on in every courthouse, every cathedral, every aqueduct, every Romance language spoken on earth. The glory that was Rome echoes still,